The mist did not merely linger in Blackveil Forest, it clung with the desperation of a dying man's fingers. Ancient oaks, their bark blackened by centuries of damp shadow, stood as silent sentinels over a land that had long since forgotten sunlight. Their gnarled branches intertwined like the ribs of some colossal beast, forming a vaulted ceiling through which the moon could only pierce in jagged silver shafts. These scattered beams illuminated what they had come to find. A trail of monstrous footprints, each one deep enough to hold rainwater and tinged pink at the edges. 4 figures moved through the gloom with the precision of those who knew death intimately. At the fore marched Roland Duskbane, a man whose very silhouette seemed honed for violence. His greatsword, notched from 100 battles and glinting with fresh silver oil, rested against his shoulder like a lover. The scars mapping his face told stories no tavern bard would dare sing. The triple claw marks from a ghoul in the Wailing Caves, the burn along his jaw where a vampire's touch had seared him, the missing tip of his left ear, sacrificed to a wereboar's tusks. He smelled of steel and smoked leather, and when he breathed, the air left his lungs in a slow, controlled hiss, as if even his exhalations were measured for efficiency. To his left, light as a shadow, glided Elindra Moonshadow. The elf moved with a predator's grace, her boots leaving no impression on the loam. Moonlight caught the wolfsbane resin smeared on her arrowheads, making them glisten like poisoned fangs. Her eyes, unnervingly bright even in the dark, flicked ceaselessly between the trees. Unlike Roland, who wore his brutality openly, Elindra's deadliness was coiled, a viper waiting to strike. The tattoos spiralling up her arms pulsed faintly whenever the wind shifted, some elven ward against evil that even now thrummed with warning. Bringing up the rear, Brother Thaddeus clutched his iron-bound tome to his chest. His armour, though polished to a priestly sheen, bore the dents of a man who used his holy symbol as both ward and weapon. The scent of sanctified oil clung to him, undercut by something darker, myrrh and grave soil. His lips moved in silent prayer, but his gaze never wavered from the trail. Every few paces his thumb traced the edge of his mace, where the words Lux in Tenebris had been etched by a smith who understood that light too, could be forged into something brutal. And then there was Vexis the Viper, slinking between the others like smoke. Where Roland was broad and Thaddeus solid, Vexis seemed barely substantial, a collection of sharp angles and sharper knives. His coat, stolen from an alchemist in Driftmark, bulged with vials, each one stoppered with wax and marked in a cipher only he understood. The faint clink of glass accompanied his steps, a discordant counterpoint to the forest's hush. When he smiled, which was often, it never reached his eyes. Those remained black and depthless, the eyes of a man who had long since stopped counting his sins. They had come for the beast, yes, but as the trees whispered and the wind carried the stench of wet fur to their noses, a deeper truth settled over them. The beast had come for them too. Roland raised a gauntleted fist. The party froze. Ahead, the footprints vanished into a clearing where the trees formed a perfect, unnatural circle, a theatre for slaughter. The ground was torn up in great furrows, as if something had been digging or burying. The stench of iron hung thick. Elindra's fingers found an arrow. Thaddeus's mace began to glow. Vexis palmed a vial of something that shimmered like crushed nightmares. And Roland? Roland smiled. Somewhere in the dark, something smiled back. Roland's fist stayed raised, his breath a slow, controlled rhythm. The clearing ahead was too perfect. A ring of blackened oaks, their roots knotted like the fingers of buried giants. The ground was torn, claw marks raking deep into the earth, and the air hummed with the metallic stench of old blood. Elindra knocked an arrow without sound, her fingers brushing the fletching in a practiced caress. The wolfsbane resin on its tip glistened wetly in the moonlight. She exhaled, and the world narrowed to the space between her bow and the dark. Then, movement. A shadow detached itself from the trees, fluid as spilled ink. It stood on 2 legs, then 4, then 2 again, its form shuddering between man and beast, yellow eyes locked onto Roland. Now, Roland growled. Elindra's arrow flew. The lycanthrope twisted mid-air, the arrow grazing its shoulder instead of sinking into its throat. It landed in a crouch, lips peeling back from fangs in something too sharp to be a snarl, a grin. Vexis was already in motion. His coat flared as he hurled a vial in a high arc. The glass shattered at the beast's feet, releasing a cloud of shimmering black mist. The lycanthrope recoiled, but not fast enough. The toxin seared its fur, the acrid scent of burning flesh mingling with the forest's decay. It howled. The sound was half human, half nightmare, rattling the trees to their roots. Thaddeus stepped forward, his mace blazing with holy light. "By the dawn's grace, you are bound," he thundered. The lycanthrope flinched, its eyes watering against the radiance, but then it laughed, a wet guttural sound. It wasn't afraid of the light. Roland charged. Roland's greatsword carved a silvered arc through the dark. The lycanthrope parried with its claws, the impact ringing like struck iron. It countered with a swipe aimed for Roland's throat, but Elindra's second arrow punched into its ribs, forcing it to stagger. Vexis darted in, knives flashing. One grazed the beast's flank, the other aimed for its eyes, but the lycanthrope spun, its tail lashing out like a whip. Vexis barely twisted aside in time, the tip raking his cheek. He spat blood, grinning. "Fast bastard, aren't you?" Thaddeus chanted, his voice weaving through the chaos. The ground beneath the lycanthrope's feet shimmered, then hardened, trapping its paws for a heartbeat. Roland lunged, his blade aimed for its heart. The lycanthrope shattered the earth with a roar and leaped, clearing Roland's strike. It landed behind him, claws outstretched. Elindra's third arrow took it through the shoulder, pinning it to a tree. The beast snarled, wrenching free in a spray of bark and blood. The party regrouped without words, falling into formations honed over 100 battles. Roland pressed forward, his greatsword a whirlwind of silver, forcing the lycanthrope to give ground. Elindra circled, her arrows finding every gap in its guard. Vexis's knives harried its flanks, each cut laced with toxins that slowed its movements. Thaddeus's spells flared like beacons, sealing its avenues of escape. The beast was bleeding. Its breaths came ragged, its movements sluggish. A deep cut across its chest oozed blackened blood where Roland's silver had bitten deep. One of its eyes was swollen shut from Vexis's poisons. They had it. Roland raised his sword for the killing blow, and the lycanthrope smiled. A howl split the night. Then another, and another. From the tree eyes ignited, yellow then red, then a dozen more. Shapes emerged, towering, gaunt, their fur matted with old gore. The first lycanthrope hadn't been running, it had been leading. The pack closed in. Roland roared, swinging his blade in a desperate arc. Elindra's arrows found their marks, but there were too many. Thaddeus's light guttered as a massive lycanthrope slammed into him, its jaws closing around his arm. Vexis ducked and weaved, but claws caught his thigh, sending him crashing to the ground. The last thing Roland saw was the Alpha's face. Human, still human, leaning in as the world went dark. By dawn, the forest was silent. And in the village below, the first screams began.